Hey, this is Cameron. Welcome back to the Busy Gardener channel. Today I am here with Kevin from Epic Gardening.
What's up, guys?
And we're going to be walking through a few things. Kevin has this amazing plot out here, including these vegetables, and they're usually you'll get seeds and you'll stick them in the ground, or you'll go and buy kind of expensive plant starts at the nursery, right. And you're kind of limited to what they've got. But there's a third way, and that is to get the seeds, start them yourself, so that way they can go in and get you this amazing setup. Kevin's going to share a few tips on how to best do that. Let's get busy. Well, this is great. Kevin, I am so just impressed by the way that you've taught so many people, so many videos on how to grow things, how to grow veggies. As you know, Busy Gardener channel, we're moving in the direction of growing. We're planting gigantic growing beds.
Sure.
And but a really efficient and effective way to start that is with you growing seeds and starting seeds.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've always said there's really nothing wrong with buying a transplant at a nursery, especially if you're a beginner gardener. Buying a transplant saves you time for a little bit of money, but it also saves you the ability to potentially avoid mistakes when you're starting seeds, right? Because if you're starting seeds, what do you get? What are the benefits of starting seeds? Number one, variety. You can grow any variety because it's going to be available as a seed, whereas if you go to the nursery, they might have 5, 7 different varieties of lettuce. On a seed catalog, you know, you've been shopping, there's hundreds, right? And so you get variety, but you also get way lower cost. So you buy a pack of seeds, maybe even if it's expensive at $5, that's way cheaper than even just lettuce starts. You buy 6 of them for about $3.99, right? You're getting hundreds of seeds in the seed pack for $5, and seeds are going to last you years and years and years. Starting seeds is a great way to ensure a healthy plant if you don't make any mistakes, get more variety, and actually save a little bit of money.
Yeah, and I'm struck also by just even the variety that you've got here. Do you know, just off the top of your head, if you were to throw out a number, how many types of plants, varieties of all of the things, if you were going to add it up over the years, would you say that you've planted?
Oh man, I mean, if we're talking seed packs, like actual seeds I have in my collection right now, it's 350, I would say, somewhere around there.
You just did a big spreadsheet.
Well, I just did a big nerdy spreadsheet and I cataloged them all. But as far as varieties, I've grown, I mean, well over 100 different varieties of things. I mean, just within like lettuce, leafy greens, and root crops, probably 40, 50 different varieties of lettuce, carrots, radish, beets, like that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, you can go crazy with the varieties. I think for a long time I went with like flashy tomatoes, you know, like what's a great one? There's a bunch of blue tomatoes out there. There's one called Dark Galaxy. So they're very colorful, very like unique ones. And then lately I've sort of been switching back to more tried and true varieties that maybe don't look as flashy, but they produce well, they're disease resistant, their flavor's really good, you know? And so I've vacillated between the two, but yeah, I mean, hundreds of varieties over the course of the last almost 10 years.
Of all of the seeds that you've started, all the plants that you've grown, you've learned over time what works, what doesn't. You've got on your homestead here so many different ways that you're growing things. And so actually at the end of this video, Kevin is going to share a few things that he's found to be easy starts. Seeds that are easy to...
just basics that you almost can't go wrong with when you're starting seeds.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to jump into some of those tips on how to start seeds. Let's go. We're here with a bunch of what I see are started seeds. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Sure. So I wanted to show the example of what you would classically get at a nursery, like we were talking about, right? And so this is what you'll call like a nursery 6-pack, and this is just a mix of different lettuce seeds. It's great. I mean, I've bypassed the whole process of starting seeds, but you pay, I think this was $3.99 for 6 lettuce plants, which honestly, it's still cheaper than the grocery store.
Yeah,
but again, you get a started plant. You get it. I mean, let's take a look at the roots here. You'll kind of see some of the benefits and the downsides. This actually looks pretty good, right? Not super root bound, a little dry, but not super root bound. Sometimes they will be. So you've started, much like you talk about the fruit trees, you gotta kind of tease it out and get it going. But yeah, less variety, more expensive, but also you save a lot of time. Now over here, of course, what we're seeing, which I prefer to do, is start a massive amount of seeds. And so you can see we have some peas here, we have some beets, we have some onions. What I personally like to do is, instead of using a tray like this, which I used to use a lot of, and I still do, but I like this style. It's a little bit smaller, and there's a lot going on, very intricate sort of things with seed starting. So let's just talk, I guess, about this one, right? This is
Yeah.
going to be more of a standard tray, or maybe even this will be more of a standard tray. A lot of people will use what we call a 10-20 propagation tray, right? The nursery standard, it's just 10 inches by 20 inches. This is a shallow one. Here's a taller one, same idea. And what's nice about that is it's a standard format. So you can fit 72 different plants in here. This is another 72 plants right here. This one is a 4x6, so it's 24. But this one kind of is like, I'd call this like the beginner's method, because what it'll do is it'll save you from some of the mistakes you might make when you're starting seeds like we've talked about. So for example, what this will do is this has a basin right here. So this is just an empty basin, right? You can fill that up with water. You'll put this little platform in. This platform has sort of a wicking mat, which will soak up water. These have holes on the bottom. Promise this will make sense in a second. When you put the soil in, water's touching the bottom of the soil and it actually hydrates from the bottom. And so one of the things that people really make a mistake on when they're starting their seeds is they will just forget to water them. And so this mitigates that because you have this whole reservoir, sort of a buffer, right, to water your seeds. So this one's called a Grow Ease Starter Tray. It's from Gardener Supply Company. I recommend this one a lot for beginners because, again, it mitigates some of those mistakes.
And also not overwatering it.
You're not going to overwater it because the soil's only going to take in what the soil can hold.
Yeah.
Right? And so unless you forget to fill the bottom, you pretty much don't have to water. So I like this for a beginner. Now over here, these are some proprietary sort of experimental trays, if you will, that aren't really out on the market yet, but I'm finding myself really liking them. So this is getting a little nerdy into the seed starting weeds, but you can see here, look at the root matter there. That's a nice, healthy root structure. Look, I mean, it comes out through the bottom. There's these side slits that are actually cut in. So that's basically to allow more oxygen, more airflow, better root structure. So if we were to pop one of these out, it's not just like this clump of roots here at the bottom, which again, you have to tease that out and there's some shock that goes into it.
It's kind of already naturally teased out.
It's a little bit closer to what it would naturally do in the soil. And so I found that you can start just about anything in a seed starting tray and then transplant it out. I mean, some things like maybe carrots you might want to avoid, some root crop stuff you might want to avoid, but I mean, I've got beets right here and I'm gonna transplant these in. Root structure's looking good. So we just got a little complicated. Maybe we step it back and talk about some of the basics, right?
Yeah, well, and I noticed that this is one. I mean, there are a lot of seed starting holes here, and or what do you call these? Just holes?
Just cells, usually cells.
But these are only a few of them. One of these like six per.
Thing. Yeah, I mean the thing that I like about this in particular is I have a larger garden than I used to have, but it's still not like a massive farm, and so I'm not starting 100 tomato plants per season. I'm starting maybe 10, right? And so I don't need a tray of 100 tomato plants. I want a variety. I like the fact that if my peas are ready, which they are, and my beets aren't ready, which they are not, that I can just pick this up and I'm good to go, right? And so I can just pop these out and I'm ready to start planting my peas. Whereas if this was all one solid tray like this, I'd have to grab a knife and kind of pop them out.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a little bit more involved. So I personally like this a lot. I will say a couple things just on the basics, right? Going back to the basics. Something that you're really going to want to do is grab a seed starting mix. You don't really want to use like your standard topsoil or your garden soil at the nursery, or even like a raised bed mix. You want something nice and fine because you want the roots to branch out, develop really nicely. You don't want them hitting like any debris or any rocks or anything like that. And so a seed starting mix, I think, is probably going to be something I would highly recommend buying instead of making your own, especially when you're starting out. And then just keeping that mix nice and moist and making sure that you adequately light the seeds, which is, I know you've done some seed starting yourself, so you've got some lighting going on.
To talk about the seed starter just for a second is one reason why you want it fine is so that way there's a lot of contact with the seed as opposed to more rough things that don't provide kind of that same buffering.
That's part of it. You also just generally, because the seeds have inherent nutrition within them, right? So the cotyledons or the seed leaves will come out. Those are usually consumed for food, because at the beginning there's no root structure to speak of, right?
Yeah.
And so there's not a network to suck nutrients out of the soil. And so when you're starting seeds, it doesn't really matter if there's organic matter in the soil at all. You can start it in pure coconut coir, pure peat moss if you wanted to, because it's consuming mostly its own content from the seed. And so what you want in the soil, instead of a ton of nutrients, is just a texture that's going to be conducive to like it really developing itself.
Yes.
Because if you're going to start seeds, right, versus a transplant, you want a really solid root structure. I mean, it's kind of like if you had a kid and you fed a junk food from birth, not ideal, it's probably not going to grow up that well.
Yeah.
Same with a seedling, right? You want a perfectly healthy seedling, because if you have that, you're going to have a really healthy plant going forward because it's already off to the right foot.
Well, let's talk a little bit about lighting. We always think, okay, seeds and plants need nutrients, they need water, and they need light. But oftentimes you're starting seeds indoors. And so talk us through a little bit about what that looks like.
Sure. So I'll say one more thing. Seeds, and we'll talk about this as well, but seeds are also going to want some kind of environmental stimulus because they're not usually in nature just starting in a closet, right? And so you want some sort of wind pressure, maybe like a light fan. But I will say you're right, that the biggest mistake someone makes when they start seeds for the first time is what we call stretched out seedlings, right? So the thin stalk is really sort of stretched, and it's a floppy looking seed. You can see how all of these are nice and stout.
They look awesome.
They're close to the ground, they're not stretching for the light. And so what Cam's talking about here is when you're growing inside, there's no sun. And so you have to light your seedlings somehow. What a lot of people will do is they'll just use any old light, and maybe they'll put it next to a windowsill and they say, well, it looks light enough to me.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that seeds and plants don't have eyeballs. they use that as an energy source. And even a south-facing windowsill, for the most part, is still probably not strong enough for seedlings indoors. And so I would say there's a lot of different lighting technology out there. It gets really complex, but I would go with maybe a standard like shop light you might grab at a Home Depot if you're a beginner. Get it pretty close. I would say maybe 6 inches or so. The general rule of thumb here is you want to get it as close as possible where it actually covers the area, so not so close that like some spots are dark, but not so close that it burns the sensitive plants. And so generally speaking, that's anywhere from 6 to 12 inches away, but it depends on the lighting you're using, how strong it is, the temperature in the house, all that kind of stuff. So there is a little bit of just judgment call there. But yeah, that's gonna be your biggest problem. Really close light, it's gonna have a nice, healthy, strong seedling. Otherwise, it's stretched out, and if it's stretched out when you plant it in the ground, even a wind is just gonna snap it and it's done. And so then you kind of wasted your time.
When do you know that these are ready? You mentioned your peas you think are ready to go, whereas your beets are not. What's an easy way to tell if your plant, generally speaking, is ready to go?
Sure, so it's gonna be plant specific, right? So the peas is a fast growing plant, it's a big seed. Honestly, a lot of people don't even start peas indoors because there's such a big seed. It can handle some moisture, some dryness outside. You can usually direct sow. But I mean, take a look at the root structure here.
Monster.
It's monster, it's healthy. These are nice white roots. They're actually starting to get a little tangled. And these peas have, take a look. So there's our seed leaves down at the bottom, right? These tiny little guys. And then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 sets of what we call true leaves. That's good enough. I mean, for me, for peas specifically, that's more than enough because we're gonna start seeing these little tendrils, which is how peas climb, start like attaching to each other. We wanna get it in the ground so they can attach to the thing we want to climb. So that's a pea specific type of thing. But let's take a look maybe at, like you're saying, these beets, right? These beets are looking pretty sparse, right? So usually, again, beets are another one that a lot of people probably recommend to direct sow, and when we say direct sow, we just mean put it in the ground where it's gonna grow. That might be optimal for beets, but I always like having more flexibility. So if I'm starting a seed in a tray, then I can put it in the ground when I want it to be there, and I don't have to like waste time, you know what I mean? And so for me, I mean, look, I've got the true leaf, right? I got the seed leaves. I want to see a little more growth on these beets before I'm ready to put them out. Otherwise, I probably should have just direct sown them. You know what I mean?
Because there's no real benefit to just growing until the seed leaves come out.
Yeah, at that point, just direct sow it. That's what I would say. And so, you know, some sensitive stuff like here's amaranth up here, these very thin seeds right here. You know, this is scabiosa, this is a flower, another flower. You want to actually see at least a couple nodes of their true leaf.
So I noticed in this one, what do we have here?
We got rat's tail radish there.
Radish. And so this has some true leaves coming out. So you've got this, is it cotyledons?
It's either way. I always go cotyledon,
Cotyledons. Sounds like a dinosaur.
It does, actually, yeah.
And then these true leaves that have kind of, they're not as smooth, they're
different texture to them. Yeah, that's the biggest indicator is that the seed leaf often does not look like the true leaf because it's sort of the food source at the beginning, you know? First little photocells to get the energy.
Yeah.
And then later on it's consumed. And so you're right, like this is getting close to getting in the ground because we've got one set of these true leaves coming out. Pretty soon there's gonna be another set. And at that point, go ahead and do it. Now, another thing I'll say, especially when you're dealing with a root crop like this radish here, is, you know, typically if it's growing for the bulb underground, you don't want 2 of them next to each other, right? I started a couple in a hole because I want to guarantee I get germination. So let's say I put 1 in each of these holes and my germination rate was like really bad for some reason, like 50%. Well, I'm only getting 3, right? But if I put a couple in each hole, I at least guarantee I get one. And so before I actually plant this out, what I'll want to do is what we call thinning out. And so I'll come through with my snips and I'll pick which one is sort of the winner of each of these cells, which is the healthiest looking one, and then I'll cut the losers out. And it kind of, it's kind of like pruning a fruit tree, right?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily love to do it, but it is necessary, especially when you're growing a root crop like this, to make sure that you get what you want, which is a big bulbing radish. If you put them right next to each other, they're just competing, you know what I mean? So it can be a little tougher.
Is there anything that you look at as being kind of a very common beginner mistake?
Yeah, so we talked about a few of them. So one of the biggest beginner mistakes is the lighting problem. Not having enough light is usually the number one problem. Most people don't overlight them because they think, oh, it's enough, you know? So that'd be one. I would say the seedling mix that we talked about, not using the right mix. Anything that's a seed starting mix is a good idea. Anything that isn't, generally not a good idea. I would spring for some sort of seed starting mix. I would say not using a sterile container can sometimes mess you up because there's a basket of bacterial and fungal diseases that sort of all are called damping off. And what happens is, let's say you take this radish here, right? What'll happen is right at the soil surface, you'll get a weakening of that stem.
Oh.
And a fungal or bacterial infection is sort of eating away right there, and it weakens it, and then it just kind of falls over. And so that's generally prevented by sterilizing your trays, especially if you're reusing them, right? Because I want to use, like, this is a very hard and sturdy plastic.
Yes.
I'll use these for decades, right? So I better sterilize them every time I do it, right?
And you're sterilizing them with?
You can do a mixture of hydrogen peroxide and water. I think roughly a 4-to-1 ratio, something like that. Depends on the type of hydrogen peroxide you use, but you can do that. You can do a little bit of bleach in water and dunk it and let it air dry. And then make sure, again, a sterile seed starting mix. Don't try to like dig up stuff from your yard and craft your own. Especially when you're beginning. You want to minimize mistakes when you're beginning. And there are a lot that can happen when you're starting seeds for the first time. So those would be a few. I would say, what would be another one? Probably the inconsistent watering issue, you know? And what I like, again, this one, remember, it bottom waters and it makes sure it's all stable. It's very similar here. I mean, you can just water the bottom of this tray. You don't have to water over the top. So I can just fill this up with maybe halfway full of water and it'll wick upwards and then I'm good to go. And so you want to make sure you do that. I will say one more thing. After about 2 weeks or so, for most seedlings, they're running out of fuel that they had within the seed. And so at that point, you'll want to take some sort of liquid fertilizer, dilute it down, because they're seedlings, they're still sensitive, but now they have a root structure. So you want to water it in with a little bit of fertilizer, because remember, the seed starting mix didn't have a lot.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you're going to need to give them something if you're keeping them in the tray. Otherwise, they're going to start eating themselves alive, so to speak. Yeah.
My kale that I planted just totally stalled out. Those cotyledons were there, and they were just growing, and they were totally spindly. And I thought, this is terrible. They're just stuck here for like a month. And then I took and threw in some fertilizer, and within 2 days, they were green, and all these leaves were popping out.
That's a big mistake because people will think, oh, they're just they're not doing anything. It's like, well, yeah, because there's literally no matter within this area that they can use. You know, and so without enough light, water, oxygen, and then finally the nutrients, that's the gas in the tank, right? And so if you don't put the gas in, they're not going to do anything.
Stalled out on the side of the seed road.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then the final thing I'll say is at the beginning. This is a mistake you can make at the beginning. So let's say I just sowed this whole tray, right? Typically, you'll have some sort of humidity dome on top. Because at the beginning, especially if you're like a sensitive, very small seed, like a basil or something like that, you'll want the top to remain moist, and you don't want to have to water it all the time. So just put a humidity dome on top. It helps keep the temperatures up, which increases the germination rate, because most seeds want to germinate above 65-ish degrees soil temperature. So unless you're using a seedling heat mat, which you can use, humidity dome creates a little mini greenhouse effect, and so that'll help you out a lot.
And keeps the moisture level up, as we have seen that. It
keeps it nice and moist. Yeah, totally. Works a lot better that way.
That's awesome. What I want to do now is, for people who, like me, are really new to starting seeds, are there some types that you think are just go-tos for somebody who's a beginner, things that are easy for beginners to try and that are going to get a really high success rate?
Sure, yeah. So I would say any leafy green is probably going to be very easy for you to grow. So kale, arugula, pick your favorites, really, any type of lettuce. The seeds germinate within 4 to 5 days. They're big seeds. You don't really, you can't lose them or oversow them or anything like that. And they grow fast. And there's really not a whole lot you can do wrong with them. You don't have to transplant them in some special way. They don't take a lot of nutrients in general. Remember, we're just eating them for their leaves.
Yeah.
I would say the bigger the seed, generally speaking, the easier it's going to be to grow. So a pea seed, very simple to germinate. If you want to, you can soak those. A lot of people will say soak it for 4 to 8 hours. You don't have to, as long as the soil's moist. It can speed it up, but honestly, it seems to me usually like an extra step, so I don't do it. Beans, very easy. Cucumbers, very easy. The bigger the seed, generally the easier it is. I would say those are some of the easier ones to grow. And you can even experiment with these root crops like the beets and the radishes. As long as you transplant them when they're ready, then they'll be good to go. You know, 'cause you wait too long, then it's trying to develop a bulb in there, and it's not an ideal situation. Yeah.
Well, this has been an amazing primer on getting seeds started. This is something that we're going to be incorporating because we are going to be trying to plant a whole lot of space. And so I know one of the reasons for doing this is while some crop is in the ground, we can kind of get a head start and do a successive. And so that way this plant is started just as we're harvesting that.
Yeah.
And so we've got a lot of room that we're looking forward to using. Appreciate this, Kevin. This has been great. Hey, if you're not already following Kevin, I don't know how it's possible, but on Instagram or on YouTube, I'm going to link to him below, the Epic Gardening channel. And yeah, appreciate it, Kevin.
Yep, you're welcome.
Hey, whether you've got one plant that you're starting in your garden or 500, till next time, stay busy.